that people were going to ask about, can I see this? And I'll probably say yes, maybe we'll see. And then I'm going to hit the share screen button, and I'm going to get us over to this little presentation. And then we're going to get started right here, right now. If you want to ask a question, throw it in the chat. I might not get to it right away. If you need to ask a question and it's like, I need help right now, just feel free to interrupt me. I joke all the time, you cannot derail me. I derail myself all the time. So this is lesson 2 in the Face of Success series, awareness. FACE is an acronym that stands for focus, awareness, communications, and execution. Those are the 4 things that I believe are absolutely necessary to find success. Last week when we did the focus thing, I kind of told the story about how in 2016 I was kind of suicidal, right? Shit was not going well in my world at all, and I needed a reset. So much like yesterday hitting the Control-Alt-Delete buttons on the year 2020, I kind of hit Control-Alt-Delete in my mind to say, what is so broken in your world? And after a lot of contemplation, I came to the conclusion that I wasn't doing those 4 things well. So last week we talked about focus, and I'm going to give you a second about that in a moment. But you can see the overall agenda and the typo and awareness. Good, I like that. So we're going to cover these areas today in the next half hour, 38 to 42 minutes, somewhere in there. It'd be a good time. So what we need to start from is, what do you want from your life, right? One of the biggest lessons that I've learned is we are co-creators of the life that we want to live. We get to dictate who we are, what we do, what we have, and how it all works out. Now, I know that the old adage is man plans and God laughs, and I still think that's true too. But we get to have a hand on the steering wheel, right? And so one of the sayings that I've heard and I've used frequently is, the hows are not our concern. So what that really means to me is, when your why is clear and when your what is clear and the why is strong enough, the hows take care of themselves. So when you know what it is you want to do, and when your why is so compelling, you don't really have to worry about it happening, because the universe just kind of draws you from point A to point B to point C and carries you along. But it starts with, what are you trying to do? And it really needs to have that ridiculously strong why. So that's your focus, right? What are you focused on accomplishing? So there you go. You could have sat here with me for 40 minutes, or you could have just watched that for a minute and a half, and you're all good. It's not really true, but it's close. All right. So today we're going to talk about 2 types of awareness. We're really going to hit hard on the internal awareness, the things that we need to know about ourselves so we can be perfectly aligned with what we are trying to do. We're also going to move into a little bit of the external awareness, because ultimately it's great to know about you, who you are, what you want, why you want it. But if you don't make sure other people are aware of those things too, you're going to have a much harder time getting it. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and one of the was the guest. It wasn't the host, but he challenged the host to think of one instance where a person achieved great success entirely on their own. 0 times that's happened in the history of our planet. 0 times. Doesn't work. Success does not happen in a vacuum. So that external awareness becomes really important. So here, we're going to start with the end in mind a little bit. I want to start with this idea of, what is your peak state, right? When you're looking at your life at the highest level, peak performance. Everything's firing on all cylinders, right? You've got no shortage of energy, no shortage of opportunity, no shortage of enthusiasm and excitement, and things going well for you. What does that look like? What does that mean? How do you feel? What is that? What is that actually? How do you behave, right? Who are you being in those instances? And that's the thing we need to look at. It's a matter of being able to make some level of shift in consciousness, because ultimately the majority of us hit that peak state at some point throughout the course of the day, but it's almost as if it's accidental. We don't control it as well as we could. And what I'm suggesting to you is you have the ability to enter a peak state whenever you want, whenever you need to. And you have to train or practice your ability to do so. So I'll give you a great example. Tony Robbins is probably the #1 self-help personal mastery guy on the planet, and has been for decades and decades and decades. Before Tony goes out on stage to speak to the hundreds or thousands of people in the room, he's on a little bouncy thing, right? He's on one of those little jogging trampolines that are like 3 feet wide. And he just bounces and he just bounces and he just bounces and he bounces, because he's changing his consciousness. He is getting ready to go give the performance of a lifetime. And that is his ritual. That is his routine. He has that anchored to peak state. And so when he does that, much like a dog hearing a bell starts to salivate in Pavlov's world, Tony Robbins bounces on a mini trampoline and hits a peak state. You need to really sit down and think about what your peak state is, or when the last time you achieved it, and then think about what it was, and then you can anchor that moment or some level of movement to shift your consciousness into a higher level. We used to talk about, there's a gentleman named Rod Hairston, and I spent 4 or 5 slides talking about Rod and his 4 laws of focus and the focus talk. And Rod will tell you that you have to have a move, right? A power move. And it was interesting. We were in a class with, I don't know, 35 or 40 people, and we were about to punch through a board, right? Like, like that whole karate thing. And we had to get in peak state before hitting that board. And it's a little bit nerve wracking because most people have never punched through a board. So we have no idea what that process is like, or how easy it is or isn't. But when you're in that mental state, it's becomes like I could have cut through that board with my hand straight like this without thinking about it and poking it that way, because it was just like there was so much power, there was so much focused energy in where I was in that moment. So how do you get back into that? So understand that peak state is reachable and you control it. So there's lesson 1. Finally, we got to something where you're learning. Woohoo! All right. So these are 3 of the things that I think are going to be relevant to you actually getting there. I want to make sure that people understand the importance of these 3 areas. We talk about, or I talk about, the 5 pillars of life. Wow, there's another typo. Sweet. 1 pillar is your physical, just your physical being. How are you taking care of that? How are you making sure that you are getting bigger, better, faster, stronger? It doesn't have to be bigger, right? But it's one of those things where, what are you doing to exercise your body? And it's similar to exercising your body, nourishment, right? How are we exercising? What are we feeding ourselves? Why aren't you eating the amount of vegetables and fruits that you need on a daily basis, right? Because it's way a lot more than most of us have access. It's just how you're treating yourself overall. And sleep becomes a ridiculous power play into that, right? For physical well-being, we need a certain amount of sleep. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs the same 8 hours or 10 hours or 6 hours, but your body knows what level of rest it needs and when. And so the idea of listening to it is really, really important. The third one, which is actually the second one on this particular slide, is mental stimulation. What are you doing to feed and nourish your mind? What are you putting in your ears? What are you reading? Right? What are you paying attention to? What conversations are you engaged in? I've never seen more people take a swan dive off of Facebook as I have in the last couple of weeks, right? Because they know that the discourse and the discussions that they're involved in are not positively stimulating them mentally. Now, I will contend that there are plenty of crap out in Facebook land right now, no ifs, ands, or buts. I will also suggest that if that's what you're looking for, that's what you're going to find. If you start looking for positive news and inspiring people and information that moves you forward, you will absolutely see that too. And if you don't, come over and hang out on my page more. So these are three of the things that'll get you there. I mentioned earlier that there are 5 pillars of life: physical well-being, mental well-being, spiritual well-being, right? How are you taking care of your connectedness to source energy or the universe or to God or whatever it is that your particular faith believes in? And what are you doing to stay connected in and around the community? To me, that giving piece is part of that spiritual side. So mental, physical, spiritual. Then you've got relationships. How are you relating to your family? How you're related to your friends? How you're relating to your clients? How you're relating to your spouse? How you're relating to those kids? How you're relating to your coworkers? How you're relating to the community in general? And then that fifth piece is financial, right? What's your financial health? And I always joke that if I was a wealthy man, there would be a sixth piece, because I'd have what my money's doing, right? How's my money making me money? And then what am I doing for work to earn money? But my money is super damn lazy. It does not go out and earn any money ever. I got to earn all the money. So that's kind of how that goes. So those are the 5 pillars: financial, relationship, spiritual, mental, physical. So those things are important. All right. Speaking of things that are important, circadian rhythms, also known as biorhythms. This is something that changes on a day-to-day basis. So this is a graph that you can look at right now where it's measuring 6 different elements: physical element, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, awareness, and aesthetic, right? And so if you look at that light blue line that starts at the 50% positive side, goes up a little bit, and then comes down. This is basically taking a look at, over the next 30 days, what does this look like for you? And you can see each one of these ebb and flow over the course of the month. So it becomes really important for you to understand where your energy is going to be. And that's effectively what this is talking about. Is your energy moving toward physical, or is it moving toward emotional or intellectual, right? So you can align yourself with where your strengths are going to be or where your weaknesses are going to be over the course of that 30 days. There are a handful of apps on, Google Play Store or Apple, the Apple Store, that you can actually start charting your biorhythms. But the more you understand this and really the energy that you get from it, the better served you're going to be able to move forward over time. So this is information that's well worth knowing, well worth understanding, and well worth doing something with. So, any questions so far? My lovely daughter just walked in. She had school time going on, so it was fun. Okay, cool. I'm gonna go check chat real quick. Real quick, he says, and then doesn't do anything real quick ever. It's so weird how it doesn't show up properly. Very good. Um, awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So this for years was my license plate. And it really served as a great message and kind of something to hang my hat on and remember. A few of you have seen me present before, and you probably know what this means. It does not mean now, hour, although I would suggest that that's pretty good advice, right? If you think about it from the power of now perspective, and we've only got so much time, and now, hour makes sense, but that's not what it is. It is also equally not no horror, which is certainly good advice too, right? We should avoid horrors whenever possible. But that's not it. That was the number 2 recurring answer. It's actually 4 words, and those 4 words are know, who.
You're freezing, Terry.
Am I freezing? Oh, that's no fun. Thank you. Am I unfrozen?
Now you are.
Okay, good. It's like I got to do the little dance every now and again. Um, so I was saying it's 4 words, and those 4 words are know who you are, right? And once you know who you are, you'll start to understand who you're connected to. And when you get that, you'll know exactly what you are here to do, right? But it takes time, it takes effort, it takes some level of introspection that not a lot of people have made the time for. That's why over these last 3 months, it was great to be able to figure out who you are and what you're up to and what you need to be doing. And if you haven't started that process yet, now is a great time to do just that. So I always invite people to take a deeper dive into who they are, because once you figure that out, you'll know what you're supposed to do. One way to do that, to start to understand who you are and what you're about, is to do a couple of assessments. The first assessment that I like to talk about is the DISC assessment. And you can go online and you can Google DISC assessment, and there are some opportunities for you to take this for free, and it'll give you an idea of what you're about. There are 4 types of people according to DISC, right? You're in the upper left-hand corner and you're conscientious. If you're in the upper right-hand corner, you're dominant. If you're in the lower right-hand corner on this one, you're inspiring, or you can be supportive. And you can see some of the characteristics, right? You're cautious and contemplative, and it shows what your values are, what your needs are, or values, confirmation, and excellence. Or, you might be in the supportive, stable, steady, sweet, need security. I'm a super high I, like off the charts I, influencing, interactive, imaginative, and involved. I think it's cute that they came up with a bunch of I words. My first need is affirmation. I obviously don't have this entire slide in here. I'm not sure why that cut off, but it did. But this is good information here. I know a lot of people, especially business owners and sales type people, are high D, so they're highly dominant, so they need control and respect and choices, so the more you understand this about yourself, the easier it is to understand it in other people too, right? So when we move into this part of understanding who we are, it's really about getting to know it at a level that we can see ourselves or see other characteristics in the people that we're dealing with. Because once I understand who you are and how you think, I'm going to have a much better way and a much easier path to communicate with you. Because what happens a lot of times is, if I'm a supportive person talking to a dominant person, I'm going to bore them to tears. The dominant person wants super high level chunks of information right now. Give me the bullet points. I don't want the details. The supportive person wants all the information in as much detail as you can possibly give it. So we tend to react to people and explain to people in a way that we want it explained to us. And that can be a deadly mistake depending on who we're dealing with, right? If you're a highly dominant person, the same thing happens. You're giving somebody bullet points that needs a bunch of details, and they're not going to trust you because you didn't give them enough information. So really, really valuable to understand this or this next one, which is the Myers-Briggs personality test. This was actually developed long before the DISC assessment. This was developed by a lady named Myers-Briggs. Oddly enough, they're not two people. It's just one person with a hyphenated name. And she developed it in part with a guy named Carl Jung, like arguably the most famous psychologist of the last century. So sharp fella, good information. And what happens here, and you've seen these codes, people get a 4-letter code based on whether they're extroverted or introverted. So you're either an E or an I. You could be either a sensory person, right, who receives information through the 5 senses, or you can be an intuitive person who receives information basically through their gut. You've got thinkers or feelers, right? So for me, so far, I'm an ENF. I'm more of a feeler than a thinker, although I will tell you that they're basically on top of each other. And decades ago, I was a thinker before becoming a feeler. I didn't know this could change, but it did. And then the last category is judgers or perceivers. So really, really valuable information. There's a website that you can go to. It's called 16personalities.com. 16personalities.com. I highly recommend spending the 18 minutes, it might be 12, that it's going to take for you to take this assessment and then read a few paragraphs about it. And then what I tell people all the time is find the 5 or 6 people that are close to you that you know really well. Ask them to take the assessment too and study what their results are, because that's how you begin to learn and be able to pick up on what other personality characteristics people have. Again, the idea being the more you understand who people are, how they take in information, how they behave in natural settings, whether they're thinking or feeling, the more you can use language that aligns with them, the more you can be on their side. We always talk about in business, all things being equal, people do business with people they know, like, and trust. Well, the way to become liked fastest is to be perceived as like them, right? So if you can use language, if you're talking to a thinker and you start using a bunch of touchy-feely talk, they're going to not want to pay attention to you. You got to use words like thinking words as opposed to feeling words, right? So it's an easier way for you to align with the people that you're dealing with. So, and we're at that point where we're kind of blending the internal awareness versus the external awareness. We're at that happy middle ground. This book is probably misplaced in terms of the slide deck, but it's also one of the most important books that I think people will ever read. It's a book by a guy named Don Miguel Ruiz, R-U-I-Z. And I firmly believe that if this was required 5th grade reading worldwide, the world would be a much better place. We really have to get into this. I'll find out if there's a site for DISC, Chris, and get back to you. But I'm sure if someone just did a quick Google, DISC assessment, there would be one. So yeah, and Andy, that does not surprise me that you're an INFJ. So the 4 agreements, very simple. Be impeccable with your word. What that really means is A, don't gossip, don't talk crap about other people, right? If you got an issue with them, talk to them directly. But it also means be careful what you say about yourself. Our self-talk can be the #1 destroyer of our own identity. So we really have to be mindful of what we're saying to us. So that's 1. 2, don't take things personally. I don't even feel like I need to explain that, but we have an entire society that's really good at taking things personally right now. 3 is don't make assumptions. Same thing. Seems like it would be super easy to understand that, but we miss that out all the time. And the 4th thing is always do your best. Now, the greatest lesson for me in that one is the idea that from moment to moment and day to day, your best is going to change. So if you're sick and not feeling well, 100% of you in that state is going to be very different than when you're feeling in a peak state. But it doesn't matter. You can still do the best that you can do in that moment, and that becomes really important. So those are the 4 agreements. What we're moving on to right now, though, is really getting into that whole external piece. For me, this is where it all starts. So if you watch me interact with people, you'll see me asking questions all the time. And it's because I'm trying to figure out where we can establish common ground. And so some of the easiest things to talk to people about are the things that we all kind of have something in common for. If we're both standing in Ferndale, I might ask you what's your favorite restaurant in Ferndale, because it turns out you probably eat food too, just like me. See how similar we are? I might ask about music that you listen to, because you probably like music. I might ask about what you like to read, because we might find some similarity there. I might ask where you grew up. I might know somebody that grew up in that same town, or where you went to school, or did you go to college and what did you study? I might ask about your work or your previous job. Always trying to find what's that common thread between us, because again, we tend to like people that we perceive are like us. And if we have shared experience, that's a great way to find common ground. This last sentence here, this practice active listening. There are 3 types of listening that I talk about a lot. In fact, we'll talk a little bit about in the communications piece. But active listening is the idea where you're basically rephrasing or reframing what someone said to assure meaning, because it's amazing how sideways communications can get. We said something, we thought we were clear as a bell, but what they heard may not be what we said. So when someone's actively listening, it's a great way to check the message that was sent is the same message that was received. So it becomes very, very valuable to do that. So I always recommend practicing active listening. And again, the communication section next Tuesday at 10 a.m. We'll talk a little more about that. This is the world we live in 2020, right? Is how do you establish a personal brand? How do you let people know who you are and what you stand for? I used to talk about in the old days, it was what you knew. You got paid for a skill set. You got paid whether you were, if you were hammering horseshoes on a horse, right? Or if you were making the horseshoes, if you were the guy that was handling out the medicine, right? Whatever the case may be, if you were the barrister in town, you had a very specific thing, and it was what you knew that people cared about. In the 70s or 80s, the phrase became very popular. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And that's still relatively important and really relevant today. But more relevant than that is how you're known, right? How are people thinking of you when they hear your name? Equally important, when they hear about a problem you solve, are you the first person they're thinking of? If I'm thinking about, man, somebody needs some better nutrition, I'm probably thinking about Andy first. If I'm thinking about logos and images for branding, I'm thinking about Leah. If I'm thinking about someone that needs some IT help or some training help right now, I'm thinking about Chris. And I'll tell you what, I'm probably going to be thinking about you too when I think about dog walking and dog sitting, especially over on the east side of town. So it becomes really, really valuable to put that mark out there that says, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is when and why you should think about me, and make sure that people know that. And you have to be consistent with it. And candidly, that was one of the biggest pieces when 2016. I don't know exactly when it was, but it was sometime around there. On my LinkedIn profile, my opening statement and my summary, I thought it was so glorious. It said, if you ask 10 people, what does Terry Bean do? You'll get 10 smiles and 9 different answers. And I thought that was genius, right? I was like, yeah, that sums it up. That's great. And it was probably true. And it probably still is true, honestly. But that's not something to celebrate, man. That is the wrong way to go, because you need to be consistent. And that brand needs to have that same touch point every time, whatever platform you're on. You might talk about it a little differently. You may showcase it differently on Instagram than you would on LinkedIn, than you would on Facebook. But ultimately, it needs to be that same thing. And then the goal here is to own spot one in people's mental Rolodex, right? You remember Rolodexes, those card files, and people kind of spin through them. So I always think about, like, in my brain, I've got a bunch of business cards. And if you want to connect with somebody, it's like we're playing a game of Go Fish. You want to be the first person they think of when they bring up your topic or your area of expertise. And so the question becomes, are you doing a good job of that? And if you're not, how do you get better at it? And if you need help with that, I know a guy. He looks like me, gorgeous beard.
It is.
Just kidding about that. Although I think I'm rather attached to it. I haven't decided yet. Ultimately, part of your branding is you need to have a message. And your message needs to be clear, it needs to be concise, and it needs to tell a story as succinctly as humanly possible. The less words, the better. And oh, by the way, that message really only needs to hit the people that need to hear it. You don't need to talk to cat owners if you're only walking dogs, right? You certainly don't need to talk to bird owners or everybody, and or people that don't have pets, right? That doesn't really matter. You need to make sure that your message is concise to dog owners in a Grosse Pointe area, because it doesn't make sense to be talking about the service you offer to me. I have 2 dogs, but I'm probably not putting them in the car and driving them 50 minutes from White Lake to Grosse Pointe. It's not going to happen.
That's
So
right.
it's got to be geographically specific if that's what your business is. It's got to be poignant and relevant that solves a problem. And then ultimately, it's got to dot your intended audience right between the eyes. If it doesn't smack them there, they're never going to hear it. We live in a hyper busy world right now where it's super noisy. Everybody's trying to gain market share and do stuff. So everybody's got information overload. So if you're not hitting your audience right here, they're not going to see it.
Yep.
They're not going to hear it. They're not going to respond to it. They're not even going to know. So instead of broadcasting, focus on narrowcasting.
Yep.
That's your goal.
Yep.
All right. So just in case my little sly next Tuesday at 10 a.m. wasn't clear enough, I'm going to sneak it in an entire slide. The C in FACE stands for communications. And we're going to talk a little bit more about messaging, but we're also going to talk about platforms and how to get the word out, right? It won't be as internal as it will be external, but we'll talk about moving that process forward. So next Tuesday, 10 a.m., same link, same password. And then I think we're moving to Wednesday in July. So I'll let you know for sure, but that's what we're looking at. But ultimately, I wanted to make sure that there was something super actionable that you could do today, right now, to change your awareness. The first thing we need to do is think about our breath, right? When yoga originated It wasn't about postures. It wasn't about positions. It wasn't about, downward dog or this is sunrise or what am I trying to think of? Anyway, the Warrior 2 had nothing to do with any of it. It had to do with breathing. And it had to do specifically with changing our breath. See, our breath is part of our automatic nervous system, right? We don't even think about it. We just breathe. And to some extent, thank God we do, or we'd probably all be dead if it was like a manual process. Can you imagine having to breathe all day, every day? Like, and if you weren't conscious of breathing, you just died. That would be tough. So we're lucky here. But what we need to do is change how we breathe. And so, one of the arguments, or one of the suggestions, I should say, is 4 count in. So inhale, and then exhale while you hold it for about 8 seconds, right? So 4 counts in, hold for 8, exhale for 4. And if you do that 5 or 6 times in succession, you can actually change your level of consciousness. It's a really great way to get into a more meditative state. It changes your brain waves. It changes the biorhythms that we talked about a little bit earlier. And it gets you the ability to it's almost like a hard reset for your body. They talk about the idea that smoking ends up being hard to quit because of its habit and nicotine's addictive. But the reality is, one of the reasons smokers don't change smoking is because smoking changes the way you breathe, right? And so people get really used to that piece too. So, A, focus on your breath. 2, create a list of things for which you are grateful, right? And maybe you think about it and write it down, or maybe you go through a list of the 5 or 15 things that you're grateful for, but you put it into a practice where at the beginning of your day, maybe even before your head comes off the pillow, or at the end of your day, right when your head hits the pillow, or better, both, you think about the things that you're grateful for, things that you're grateful for that are going to happen today, things that you're grateful for that did happen today, whatever the case may be. And if you can spend some time in the state of gratitude every single day, you'll have more things to be grateful for every single day. It's a beautiful thing, right? Gratitude is a practice that we need to stay in daily. The last thing I want to talk about is this idea of visualizing. When they look at professional athletes, they have guys that were practicing free throws on a basketball court, right? And so they set up 3 different groups of people. They had one group that practiced for a half hour every single day, shooting free throws, physically shooting free throws, boom, 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 boom. They had one group that zero practice, didn't do anything, nothing at all. They had another group that practiced shooting free throws, but didn't touch a basketball, weren't on a basketball court. They practiced in their mind. At the end of the month, the group that practiced every single day, their increase was about 10%. The group that didn't practice at all didn't have any increase, no surprise. The group that visualized practicing had an increase of 11%. Their increase was better than the guys that were physically doing it every single day. Visualization is powerful. If there's something you want, you have to see it in your mind before you will see it in reality. And so I implore you to practice the idea of visualization. And then that's it. That's how that works. So a big shout out to my friends at Assemble, hireassemble.com. Also give a quick shout out to my friends at PKIG, Phil Klein Insurance Group, because, super grateful for those that are putting up with me and dealing with me and helping me be better at what I'm trying to do. If you have questions or need information, I've got a boatload of it, and I would love to share it with you because it's kind of what I like doing. Let me figure out how to hit this stop share button so I can come back and see your lovely faces. There they are. Fantastic. I'm going to check this little chat box because I see there's a couple of messages in here. Andy's an INFJ. I like that. Yeah, the breath is for sure. Yeah, it's so important. Breathing and just changing it and being present to it and aware of it is good. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. What podcast was I listening to? It was a podcast with John Assaraf, and he is like one of the leading brain scientists on the planet. He was a guy that was in the movie The Secret, so he was a business guy, owned a real estate company called Remax, grew it to a $4 billion Remax office in Indiana, and then set off to go change the world. He had a really cool company called One Coach for a while, and then kind of been off on his own thing doing what's called inner size. So he's teaching people all about this. And it was fascinating. I was listening to this podcast a week ago, and he was talking about the importance of awareness. I'm like, you son of a gun, I've got a whole class scheduled on awareness just next week. You know you're in the right place in life when. You know, one of the lessons I talk about all the time is life puts signs in our path. When we're really clear on what we're trying to do and we're open to guidance, those signs show up repeatedly. And so it's just a matter of being aware of them and paying attention to them. So John talking about this idea of awareness really made me smile. So very good, and thank you, Desiree. I appreciate that. I like the presentation. I really do. I actually wrote this originally as its own standalone piece called "What's Your Awareness Quotient" or your AQ, right? Because people always know their EQ, and well, I don't know about always. People know their IQ for sure. They might know about EQ, but to me, I'm like, listen, more important than those things is how aware are you? One of the comments on LinkedIn is like, oh my God, you should have 37,456 people sign up for this because people are clueless. And he said, but those people probably aren't aware that they need the class. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any ideas? Any cooking tips?
Do you have a link for like the DISC, how to do that assessment, or just Google it and there's several?
You know what? Someone else asked that, and so I will get you one right now. But yes, to answer your question, it is definitely Google it. But here's a good answer to the question, and here is a good link.
Okay, great. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. My pleasure. So yeah, you can take that, and it'll be super valuable just to be able to see it from a understanding self perspective, right? Because ultimately that's where it starts. I was on the phone, guys. I was on a Zoom call last night with a dude for about an hour and a half, and this guy's in Australia, and he built a software business starting in 2000, and he sold it in 2018. At one point in the growth of his business, he was managing over $1 trillion in real estate transactions, right? So I don't know what you sell a business that does $1 trillion in volume. I don't know what you sell that for, but it was like $1.1 trillion. And this guy spent an entire 90 minutes chatting with me. And he has this system called 1357. It's actually system 1357. Actually might be worth taking a look at because for right now, he's opening it wide open, no charge, all free. And it's going to be several $100s a month once he gets to 1,000 people. He's got about 250 in there right now. So system1357.com. But he said, the 3 stood for healthy, wealthy, and wise. The 5 was a bunch of systems that he uses to manage process. The 7 was the ideas that he has around managing time. And the 1 was you, right? Because ultimately, he said, it all starts with you. And so it's worth taking a look at if you're a curious type. He's got about 500 minutes worth of video up. He said 160 videos he's got in there. So 3-minute videos is 480 minutes. So it's pretty cool. I would definitely check out System 1357. I think it's system1357.com. Is there a link to last week's session? You know what, Christopher Johnson, last week's session is living on my laptop right now, probably never to be seen. So imagine now in this particular presentation, we spotted 2 typos because I'm the type of guy that will actually do a presentation without really looking at it and then spot the typos and then make fun of the guy who put the presentation together, because that's me. So I feel very comfortable with that, because I'm my 4 agreements, number 1 is the one that I have to work on the most, being impeccable with my word, because I talk shit about me all the time. So now we've got some typos in this one. Last week's presentation that I didn't look at first had images on top of images on top of images. So it was aborted. I think that's a word. And I made fun of me during that on multiple occasions. So that deck has not, that presentation has not seen the light of day, but I can send it to you because I sent it to the people that attended. And I probably ultimately have to re-record all of these anyway. So once I get to that, I could do that as well. But I'll get you the deck for sure. I'll get you the deck for sure. So very, very good. Anything
Excellent.
else?
No.
Awesome. Cool. You guys, thanks so much for being with me this morning. I really appreciate it. And if there's anything I can do for you, as always, let me know.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Bye, Terry.
Bye.
Take care.
See
Bye.
you soon.